Now. And I think we are now broadcasting. All right, so hello, CADA, and good evening. Welcome. It's great to see you all. We have our second in our stay-at-home webinar series now. I have Jeff Culver with me here. He is our Professional Development Coordinator. I am Ron Ippolito. I'm your CADA President-elect. And with us this evening, we have Travis Bell, Dan, is it Bowen, Dan?
Oh,
Bowen.
Bowen.
Bowen. Okay, like bow and arrow, Bowen.
Like bow and arrow.
Okay,
no.
So Travis and Dan, they have their social media hacks presentation that they just recently gave at the CADA convention in Reno. Very popular. I have a very, very inopportune time for my dog to be barking right now. And so we thought, well, gee, since no one is physically on their campuses, we would love to be able to give all of our CADA members the opportunity to hear some of your tips and tricks, your social media hacks that you use throughout the school year normally, and then especially the ones that you've been using now since we've all been out of school for at least 2 or 3 weeks now. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping issues. We have a Q&A and we have a chat. So when we have a webinar format, there are both of them. So down at the bottom, if you want to ask a question of our presenters, you're going to go ahead and put it in the Q&A section. If you have like a resource to share or just some other thing that you want to throw at us, you're going to go ahead and put it in the chat, and just make sure that you are addressing that to all panelists and attendees. That way everyone can see it in the chat. Okay, so, and then the final thing that I wanted to mention is with regard to the Q&A portion, we're going to, I think we're planning on saving most of our Q&A till the end. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but if there is something really timely or really prescient, it's just something that's on your mind, you're welcome to throw that out, and we'll get to it either, in the middle of the presentation, or we'll wait till the end. Just kind of depends on, where we are and what feels right. So Dan and Travis, we're going to go ahead and I will let you formally introduce yourselves. And actually, hold on real quick. Jeff Culver, did I miss anything on the instructions?
Just in the chat, keep in mind there's options between who you're sending messages to. There's all panelists and attendees, and then there's also individual private messages that you can send to guests that are within the webinar as well. So just pay attention to what it's going to. If you want messages to everybody, make sure all attendees are selected on that.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, now that we've taken care of the housekeeping issues, Dan and Travis, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks for having us. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Dan, you're going to go ahead and share your screen, right? I am shared. There you go. Well, my name's Travis, as Ron was saying. I'm the principal at Acalanes High School in Lafayette, California, which is just about 40 miles outside. I actually have no idea how many miles outside of San Francisco it is, but it's in California. It's about 40 minutes outside of San Francisco. And I've been there for 4 years. This is my 8th year there, 4 years as principal. And then prior to that, I was the leadership teacher at Doherty Valley High School, where Dan and I really connected. And I'm Dan Bowen. I've been teaching leadership at Doherty Valley High School for 8 years. This is my 8th year. And been teaching overall, I think, 12 years. And yeah, that's everything you need to know about me. Yeah, and we're gonna run through the presentation that we did at CADA. But Dan, if you want to talk a little bit about, it's crazy to think we were just in a casino like 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago? Yeah, we were talking to Ron and thousands of people. Yeah. So the presentation we did at CADA, we're gonna give an abbreviated version of that in a moment, where we go through just some of the fundamentals of social media, and particularly we're gonna focus on Instagram, and we're gonna explain in a second why we're gonna focus on Instagram. But one of the reasons we had the luxury of social media when we gave that presentation, because we had this day-to-day face-to-face interaction with our students. And with shelter in place and really working remotely now, we've lost that component. And so although we're going to focus on the social media, and that's going to be our big focus, we're also going to talk about, our focus, I should say, is going to be on Instagram. We're also going to talk about some other methods of connecting with students online and building culture and community online. because really there are some things that are necessary, and that face-to-face connection is necessary. So we're going to talk about some of those things as well, because without the foundation of that face-to-face connection, we have to supplement that with some online connection. Yeah. And we're gonna, we do have some assumptions for this presentation. We have an assumption that most of you guys have an Instagram account for your school, which I was actually surprised that assumption didn't really hold true during the presentation at CADA. And there were people there who were creating accounts in the session with us, which I think is totally fine, because if you don't have an account, I really do think the next 15 or 20 minutes can be a good resource for helping you create that account with what we wrote here, with intentionality and something that represents your school with equity as well. So we do have that assumption. You're also going to hear us continue to come back to Instagram as kind of the sort of driving force for what we see as the way to connect socially online right now. And so we want to run through a few of these like Insta-hacks that we highlighted at the CADA conference just about a month ago. First, we do think, just to build like a little bit of a foundation here, we do think social media is important. As a principal of a school, I know that there's a lot of concerns with having a social media account and what that looks like for your school and how are you managing it. But the reason why we think social media is so important and why we think it's worth taking that sort of educated and assessed risk is because it's where students spend most of their time. And especially now, considering the stay home orders and the shelter in place, we were actually trying to find some data of how much more time people have been spending on their social media accounts. And if the memes about COVID-19 and shelter in place tell us anything, that that's hard data. That is hard data.
That is hard data. So it's where students are spending their time. Secondly, we know that effective use of social media for your school keeps your students and staff and community better connected and informed. And again, you really look at that, that's like essential for the now. So Dan, if you want to hit the slide forward and kind of tag those last two. Yeah.
And then effectively using social media on and off your campus can create a more inclusive culture. One of the things that at my school and in Travis's school we've tried to do over the last couple of years is make our social media more of a storytelling device rather than something that is just leadership broadcasting, telling people what to do. In fact, we've moved away from using leadership students pretty much entirely on our social media rather than featuring them. We're trying to tell other people's stories. And we found that using social media intentionally can improve your leadership classes rapport with your student body. And now is not the time for your social media to go silent. One of the things that I know we wrestled with when we found out we were going to be off campus was about 3 weeks ago, was what next? And one of the things that we decided needed to happen immediately was we needed to let our campus know that we were still there. And we needed to do that through telling other people's stories. So establishing your social media as a platform for other people is essential, and especially in building rapport with your community. So we're going to dive into that as well.
Yeah. And then just a few sort of like macro facts about Instagram. We know there's lots of other social media platforms that are out there. Just the reason we're focusing primarily on Instagram, why we focused on it for the CADA convention, and why we're choosing to continue to focus on that during these stay home shelter in place orders. First off, Twitter, really what the data shows is 30% or less are high schoolers. And of that, almost 2/3 are male. TikTok, I think, which is what many people are saying, like the up and coming, like social media, slowly taking over what was Snapchat for a long time. Right now, it's definitely seen more as like entertainment. It's not as much of a connecting platform, and it can be pretty polarizing. Just in surveying our own students and talking to other high schoolers, it's like you're either all in or you're not. And then for Snapchat, which is still heavily utilized, what our students have said is that they really see this as more of like a sacred space for friends to individually connect. And it's almost like a text messaging platform and not something where they want to be inundated with things that are going on or information about their school.
So it can kind of be all over the place, but with Instagram, obviously the data is there to support that many of our students are using it. It's pretty, gets a diverse, and equal population. And if you guys have seen Mike Smith talk before, he kind of gets people into the analytics of their use. And what Instagram's putting out is that there's an average of 28 minutes per day, but I think we all know that much more is spent when you are seeing those students kind of share their analytics of how long they're online with their social media.
So the first, good, cool. So
yeah,
the first hack that, sorry, it was not clicking, just media tech.
Okay.
How social is your school social media? So again, we're operating under the assumption that your school has an Instagram presence. And one of the things that we did with our school's Instagram account, this was like the beginning of this school year, is I did an assignment in my freshman leadership class. I teach a freshman leadership class and 2 general leadership classes. And I did an assignment and I linked it, and we'll send you these resources after as well. And I would encourage you to do it with your students. And this is definitely something you could do remotely. I encouraged them, basically, I put them in groups and I had them analyze various aspects of our social media. And they had to basically create, I think it was like 4 or 5 charts looking at various sample areas of focus. So I had them look at the representation of race and gender on our social media accounts, had them look at the sports that we're showing, I had them look at basically all these different facets of our school's social media account. And it was really, in some ways, there was some encouraging data we gathered from that, but there was also some like difficult look in the mirror, like we need to make some changes, realizations that we had. And I'm going to show you some of our charts. I'll be vulnerable with you in a moment, but it's important, I think, to gather data about your school's social media so you can know where your gaps are and what needs to be represented. The nice part about social media in the midst of just this chaotic time is you have the opportunity to still utilize social media, and you can still make improvements even though you're not on campus, because it doesn't have to do with obviously your physical location. We're going to talk a bit about how to use insights and analytics as well. This is our school social media account. This is actually a picture from our CADA presentation, so it's a little bit old. And to dive into just some of our information, you're welcome to check out our account later. It's at DVHS Wildcats. One of the things we looked at was post by season. So this showed us we were, at least in the 2018-2019 school year, pretty equitable in how we promoted our sports. Our fall sports, spring sports, and winter sports all got about 1/3 of our posts in terms of the sports posts. So that was pretty good. Then we broke it down by individual sports, and a couple pieces of glaring information. Number one, our men's basketball team was about 10% of our posts. Our men's basketball team happens to be our most successful team at our school. So it kind of, I guess, makes sense, not to justify it, but it made sense to me why we had more basketball posts than almost anything else. But our women's soccer is not our most winning team at our school, but it does just so happen to have the highest concentration of leadership kids on the team. There's 11 girls on the varsity team who are currently in leadership, which is the most I've ever had of any sport on one team. So it was like, yeah, that's pretty obvious where that issue is. So that was last year, and that's definitely something we've worked to address this year. And then the types of posts, a big chunk of these were leadership posts. I'm gonna move this little window for my own sake. And then our sports posts, we had a ton of sports posts, and I get into it a little bit later. But because we had so many sports posts in our last school year, we actually ended up creating a separate athletics account so we could continue to promote our sports, but then on our main account to continue to have to be able to promote in a more equitable way our other our other events and activities, and to be able to tell stories in a different way. And then finally, this was a really interesting, this was like a 2-day conversation we were able to have with our kids. On the right, you'll see our school's demographics. We have about 3,400 students, closer to 3,500. And on the left, or on the right, you'll see our demographics, obviously. And then on the left, you will see our representation, our social media posts. And that was actually for this school year, the 1920 school year. And there is a disparity between our posts and our actual demographics. And then that brought up the discussion of representation, that we have 2% of our student population are African-American students. However, 17% of our posts are featuring students who are African-American, but then we talked about the importance of representation. So analyzing what your school is posting is a very, not only is it essential, but I think just to have those conversations and to look at what you're posting in a critical way can ultimately generate better representation and telling better stories. And then Trav is, I believe this is
so we, we did get, and I'm sorry if you hear my 1.5-year-old screaming through the wall. I'm not sure, you know, what my wife is doing, but I'll make sure to spank him after this. So we, so one thing is, no, it's not funny. So one thing that when Dan was sharing about the assignment that he did with his freshman leadership class, that was all like anecdotal, and it was student perception. So it was really looking at the students were kind of making their own determination of what type of post it was, and then gathering that data, which I think is a great practice for sites to do, especially when you're not sheltered at home. Although it could be like a good assignment for some of your leadership kids while they're sheltered at home. But we also want to provide some hard data and evidence. And really the best way that you can do that is by creating a professional account. And the steps are on the screen so that you can see it here. And we actually had a lot of questions about this and helped some people walk through this at the CADA conference. But I don't want to spend too much time looking at this just because we can help you after. We'd be glad to connect with you and even set up individual Zoom calls where we can walk you through it. But by creating a professional account, it really gives you the ability to look at the insights and analytics, which we'll share with you in just a minute so you can see, Doherty, like the data that you actually get. But many people just create their Instagram account and it just creates a personal account. But from a school perspective, or that of a business, you really want to have that professional account. And you would want to do that by when you log into your little, I call it the hamburger like bar at the top, the 3 lines, you would click on that, you go into your settings, and then down at the bottom, you'll notice you can click this, this switch to a professional account. It takes you over, you can set yourself up as a business. And oh yeah, I'm using my arrow as if they can see what I'm doing, but Dan, I'm glad you're tracking with me. It's like two minds, one body. Does that work? Okay. So you'd want to select it as a business, and then you can put your category in as a school, and you'll notice that you can even denote down there at the bottom where it says high school, you can even select a high school. Once you do that, you actually start getting access to all this really cool data about your account. And I'll let Dan share a little bit about the data that they were finding through the insights and analytics of the Doherty Valley Instagram account.
Yeah, so this was a popular post for our school. We did senior athletes, this was our winter athletes. And if you click the post, you have this little view insights button, and you click that, it pulls up a bunch of information. One of the things that's interesting that we found out, I'll go to the next slide, is when you click insights, it'll tell you some demographics or some data about your post. It'll tell you the demographics, like who's looking at your post. Like for us, 44% of men, 56% of people who go to post are men, or excuse me, women. And it'll also tell you different things like the age of the people who are looking at it. We found like there's a lot of people in the parents' age range who are utilizing our account. It'll also tell you this one. And one thing I wanted to point out is for us, what we found is
can I interrupt real quick? No, it's not. They're not. Parents aren't utilizing an account. They're looking at the account, right?
Accessing it, viewing it. Yeah. So this shows you who views the account. One thing that we found is there's a word that we're going to talk about in a moment, which is engagement. We had a lot of engagement on our posts around 6 o'clock on Friday nights and 9 o'clock on Friday nights. The word engagement is important because the way the Facebook algorithm and Instagram algorithm works is the more people engage with your posts, the more they view your posts, the more they click like on it, the more they comment. Instagram has transitioned from like a chronological timeline where it just would show you all the posts in order on your feed of when they were posted. Now what they do is basically they prioritize posts that they think you will like. They're in your heads. So they're trying to figure out what you'll like, and the way they figure out what you like is the type of post you engage with. So it's not just a matter of, you're not trying to make a popular account just for the sake of making a popular account. You want to tell stories that are engaging, so people click your posts, so people swipe through your slideshows that you put up there or watch your video. So that way, next time you post something, maybe that does have some really important information that you're trying to advertise, that post will actually show up in their feed as prioritized. So knowing what time people engage with your account is an important thing. That being said, this looks totally different during shelter in place. I've been talking to my students. I had a meeting with my rally team on Google Hangout a couple days ago, and it was a noon meeting, and my students had to set an alarm. One of my kids had to set an alarm for noon because he's been getting up at literally he said between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. because he stays up till 4. So the time that our posts are probably more appealing might even be later. I'm not going to post that late, but I think it's important just to look at and kind of get a sense for it, but just also realize during shelter in place, these numbers are probably going to be an anomaly as opposed to like a typical school year post.
I did see a question pop up about, I saw a question pop up about you can do this at any time and you don't lose any of your content. So you don't need to create a new account to switch to a professional account. You are just switching over to a professional account. You won't have any analytics on your content prior to switching over because it hasn't been tracking that. So you'll get the analytics post
from that moment forward.
From that, switching over.
And the insights, which the analytics, insights, kind of interchangeable words for this, can tell you when to post. Like I said, they tell you what types of posts perform best for you. And what we found early on, and one of the reasons, kind of an indicator for us that we needed to stop just talking about leadership things, was there wasn't a lot of engagement when we put a post up of a student saying, hey, come to the rally on Friday. And it was a leadership kid just saying, hey, come to the rally. We found more engagement when we were telling the story about a kid who won an archery competition, like not even a sport we have at our school, but we told the story of a non-leadership kid, and that had a bunch of comments and likes. So again, the engagement is important because you want your future posts to be viewed by your students. And insights, like I said, can help you become more intentional with your posts. You see what people are engaging with, and you want to give them the types of content that they're looking for in your account. And I mentioned the algorithm. The algorithm is this tricky thing. To be honest with you, I don't really like it, but it's a necessary evil understanding it. So you want to put posts out there that will be engaging to your student body. Every student body's post is they're going to be different. What is engaging to your student population. But I'm going to tell you what I found almost without fail is if you have an account and you're just having leadership kids telling leadership things and leadership stories, those accounts are going to be far less engaging and far less interactive than those that are telling stories that represent your student body as a whole.
I also think, just for this current moment before you move on, Dan, that with where we're at with this, with the shelter in place, I do think that the use of analytics could be really helpful in terms of like identifying like what content is meaningful to your community right now. And that can help drive like what you need to be putting out there during this time, which we'll get into like on the back half of our presentation, which is the new material, but something to consider now.
Yeah. So one of the things that the mantras I would say that Travis and I have when it comes to social media and really all student events is student events. I'll zero in on social media, Instagram in particular. It should be for students, by students, with adults. I'll get into the specifics in a little bit of how we manage our accounts, but I have students who manage my account and I oversee it, but I've given them enough guidance and direction along the way that I don't have to do much micromanaging. There's time to time where I have to delete a post or go back to the student and say, hey, tell me what your mentality was going into this post. But the audience for your social media should be your student body. In addition to that, the post should be done by your students. I could go through the Doherty Valley Instagram account, and I would say honestly less than 5% of the posts in the past 3 years have been things I've posted. It's all student driven and student led, telling stories about students. Again, one of the transitions we've made for shelter in place is, and we'll talk about some of our hacks in a little bit, but basically reminding students that the staff are there for them still. And so we've been telling staff member stories as well, but acknowledging the fact that this is a student account for students. And as I said earlier, just because they're leadership students doesn't mean they're uniquely gifted to share an announcement or represent other students. One of the things we do when we're on campus is if we have an announcement, something we need to promote, I go next door, I send my kids next door to the art class that happens to be next door to us and says, hey, we say, find a few kids to help tell that story, to share that announcement on our Instagram story, rather than having the same leadership kids over and over saying, hey, come to the rally. Have non-leadership students be the voice. I view our leaderships class as like producers and directors, putting on essentially a performance, putting on a show, and the actors, that's the student body. And that our job is to put them in a position where they can be on that stage. We help provide the platform, but they're ultimately the performers. And that we've maintained that through this shelter in place, which we'll talk about in a second. And then establishing a system for takeovers, which Trav is going to talk about a little bit, especially right now more than ever. I think we've done more takeovers since shelter in place than probably the entire school year combined. And Trav will talk about that a little bit, or at least the process for it.
Yeah. And you'll see on our slides, like clearly that this is a hyperlink here for a contract. And these slides will be shared I think Ron will share them after, and then we have a website where we keep our content. And so it'll be on that website, and then you can click that link and have access to the contract that you'll see for a takeover there. The reason why we're going to talk about takeovers is because we do want our students to get creative in terms of how can we be thinking about and representing our school and providing a voice for the student body. And this allows students to kind of define their own roles of who they see themselves being and representing their school, and then can avoid really avoid like this tokenism where leadership students are going out and just trying to find like these different students, like, hey, you're from this club, can you just talk about this club? Or like, hey, you're from, you identify as this, can you represent like our Gay Straight Alliance Club, or can you represent like our BSU? And so it really like, you want to avoid that tokenism component. As Dan and I were prepping for the CADA presentation, we actually got to talk to a former student of ours who we were told we're not allowed to say her name or where she works from because it would require all sorts of like security level clearances for her to be like representing this like social media platform, but it's a prominent social media platform.
We might have even mentioned it. We might have mentioned it, but she works for this social media company. And then she sat down with us. We had like about an hour-long conversation with her, and it was just incredible. But we pulled out this like 2.5 minute little clip. She was a former leadership student of ours. I can't remember if she was just my English student, Dan. And then I think she was in English. I had her in leadership. Yeah.
And you had her in leadership. But just like a really incredible, not real. That you guys don't care about that, but yeah. So why don't we go ahead and show this video real quick, and then we'll continue on with that content. So yeah, Dan,
let me know. This is the big Zoom test. This is the technical test of the night. Let me know if you can hear the audio. Oh gosh, failed test one.
Oh gosh.
I think, okay, we can take the scenario of a high school planning to open the door up to a student organization to do a takeover. What this means is inviting them to be a part of the creative, programmatic content strategy for this takeover. You give them X amount of slots, you let them know what media they're working within so they don't go crazy. But then you also say, what is most important to your organization to convey? Are there like special events that you want to cover? Is it messaging? Is there something that's misunderstood about your group that the rest of the campus doesn't know about? People see you as X, but would you like to talk about Y? So really leaving the door open versus putting people in roles. And I think that high school is really emblematic of putting people in roles. I don't know how many scenes we've seen in the media when it comes to coverage of high schools, both like real media and fictional media, of like, Geek Squad, and then it's band, and every single group comes with their own tropes. So instead of casting them into those tropes and leaning into those tropes, why don't we just open the door to invite them, to appear as they would want to? I think Jordy did an example of this where they opened the door for each group of like freshmen to create like a TikTok, and I saw so many different, I've been stalking Jordy TikTok, I saw so many different representations of how students wanted to appear on there. Like, let's try more things like that versus deciding how this group would want to appear. Always asking questions, always asking if they're comfortable, giving them the opportunity to review the material also, and ensuring that they're adequately represented, and then not being afraid to question language. So if we're putting out press releases, we're sending out emails about different groups or cultural heritage months that we celebrate at the high school, bring someone in from that group if they feel like they would like to participate. So also not forcing any marginalized group to participate just because they identify that way, but really inviting them to the table, and acknowledging that, hey, it's not your responsibility to do this work, but there is an opportunity to make it more representative if you'd like to participate. So just really asking a lot of questions, doing frequent check-ins, and leaving the door open.
Man, I love that. I would, you know, if we had more time, I'd love to just dissect more of that and share more of what she had to share with us, because it really was just incredible. But she talks about this idea of authentic representation. And so I really think when you are considering the content that you're creating for your accounts, you want to consider ways in which you're both providing that authentic representation, avoiding the tokenism, and utilizing communication that gives voice to those groups on your campus. And so we have a few things here. We talked a little bit about takeovers. The contract that's linked is really great for that. I working with Dan just from an administrative perspective, and kind of adding in some language that really helps provide some coverage for that. But it does, you're really giving the autonomy and the authority and the trust to those students or that student group to create the content for your account with that takeover. There's a lot of little things with that we can share more in terms of like creating new passwords or sharing the passwords that you have. And it does get, there's some specifics there that I think would be helpful, but for the sake of time, and again, we can talk more with you about that later. And this is both for staff and students. So not just allowing students to have takeovers, but students love hearing from the staff as well. So providing a day where you might have your English department be doing a takeover for something, and that can help build some culture and climate as well. Really looking beyond the calendar, we've talked a lot about telling stories. So it's not just posting dates or taking a picture of a poster that has a date in there about rally on March 27th, but really telling the story of the students and maybe telling stories about the event. Like, why are you putting on the rally? Who are you celebrating? And what's that story that's worth telling before? We added in for now, like, this is especially true now. Like, everyone is having a different experience of what this means for them, this shelter in place, and what they're grieving through this loss, and how can we find ways to like grieve with them, and then also like celebrate the little things that people are getting to experience, not to mention those who are experiencing sickness or death in their families or friends' lives as well. And then making your account open source. What we mean by that is that leadership doesn't have to be the one that's generating or curating all of the content. As a matter of fact, it's so much easier if you have systems or avenues in which other people are able to share the content with you that you're posting. This was a really hard thing for me. I know it was for Dan as well, but in terms of like letting go of that control of like, I had a certain image or idea of what I wanted my account to look like when people went through our Instagram pictures, and really like letting that go, giving students the control. And that really means like all students. So opening yourself up. We have people where it's like, hey, they send a direct message to the Instagram account and says, can you post this with this verbiage? And so we have, you know, leadership students that will like edit that verbiage, make sure it's gone through the like approval process, and then it gets put up on the Instagram account. And we also did want to just talk about, even though it's open source and a lot of people are going to be following your account, that doesn't mean that you should be following back. As a matter of fact, just from an administrative perspective, it's better that you don't want to see what people are posting and then be held, you know, liable or responsible for what they're posting. So you should really only be following those that are like your school accounts that might be giving you content that you want to like add to your Instagram story to help promote and share the content that's happening there. So I know we're trying to fly through a lot of this because we have you know, a lot more, but how to increase engagement. Dan, it's all you.
All right. So increasing engagement, we talked about, it's not just about getting the likes and comments. It's sort of irrelevant from just an algorithm standpoint, which is a word to use when you want to sound smart. Just start saying algorithm a lot, like, oh, you went to a conference. But anyway, as far as increasing engagement, there's some ways to do it within Instagram to get people to look at your posts and engage more. So one, if you're going to post videos, use captions. Number one, that requires you to have a little more thought. You can't just go and film like a student and say, hey, like, here, say this. Like, it requires you to take that video, edit it. And there's plenty of apps, not only on computers, but you could edit on an iPad, you could edit on your phone. There's a bunch of free software out there that'll allow you to add captions. But Adding captions to your video is super important. A lot of people, even at home right now, they're multitasking. They're watching a video maybe on silent while they're watching Netflix, while they're literally gaming. There's like all these things multitasking. And so most people are watching videos without sound. Slideshows, when we talk about slideshow, I'll try and find a sample post, but slideshows are basically, it'll allow you to post multiple. This is the most high-tech way.
This is like, yeah, no one can see
right
what
here.
you're doing.
Anyway, you can swipe through it. And by using slideshows and maximizing them, Instagram will allow you to post up to 10 photos in a slideshow. By utilizing those 10 photos or close to 10, it requires people to be on your account longer. So again, each swipe counts as engagement to Instagram, and it tells Instagram, hey, this person wants to see my content again in the future. Post memes and inspirational quotes, not just school related content. One of the silver linings of this whole shelter in place, if you're anything like me, has been the memes, and most of them are not appropriate for school, but there are some that are. So sharing memes on your Instagram story that are timely and not just pertinent to the school. I think it can come across really as tone deaf right now to act like, hey guys, who's excited for graduation? Well, hey, that looks entirely different now than it did before. So not having this automated robotic sound to your post, but realize and acknowledge that what's happening in the world that isn't just in this vacuum or this bubble that is your school. Being consistent with your feed and story is super important, especially right now. As silly as it sounds, having that subconscious, that presence of your social media tells your students, hey, we're still there and we're going to be there. So being consistent during the school year. If my kids come to me and say, hey, Mr. Bowen, we're thinking of doing this new feature where we talk to teachers or we do this, I tell them, and I pretty much say this the same way every time: whatever you do, if I approve something, whatever you do, you need to be consistent with it. I don't want it to just go away after a week. So if you're doing Freshman Feature Friday, I better see that each Friday. Encourage clubs to have their own Instagram accounts, and sports teams can do it as well. We have 160 clubs on our campus, and I don't have the ability, and my students don't have the ability to keep track of everything that's happening with those clubs. So we encourage them to have their own clubs. We often will share what they share, what they want us to share in our story, but we tell them to tell their own club stories on their own feeds for the most part, and get creative with the new series. These were things we did during the school year. Teacher Tales was a fun one. Teachers eating hot food, which if you've seen that YouTube show, celebrities basically eating hot wings, we did something similar with our teachers, and it was really fun. So doing things that aren't just like promotional or trying to create content, creating community has to do with telling stories, and humanizing teachers is a big part of telling those stories. And then going live at an event, probably looks a little bit different right now, but takeovers is what I would lean into a little bit more right now. We'll get into it later. Organizing your social life is the final hack. One thing I would challenge you to do, it's easy to get carried away with social media, especially Instagram, and think like, oh, we need an Instagram for all these different things. My leadership class is in charge of managing 2 leadership accounts. It's in charge of managing at DVHS Wildcats and at DVHS Athletics. Athletics is our sports account, Wildcats is our main account. That being said, my class officers have their own accounts that they manage individually for their classes that tell class specific things and tell class specific stories. My senior officers have been killing it over this shelter in place in terms of continuing to tell stories of seniors. And they've been doing so well that I've moved a lot of their content. I've had them move their content to our main account because, as we all know, especially for high school teachers, this is a really difficult time for seniors. And so allowing their stories to be front and center as we kind of finish out that year has been super important for us. During the school year, though, we typically kind of consolidate things. Limit account managers. I have a PR team in my leadership class, and they're in charge of the social media. They run our Instagram accounts. The only other students who have access to that account is my ASB officers. I have 4 ASB officers. One exception to that, as I mentioned, was I try not to make my rules like so letter of the law. There's a global pandemic going on, and I want my senior stories to be front and center. So I've allowed my senior officers to get in there as well. So I mentioned it. These are examples of the class accounts. This is from February. Their account looks different now, but I would recommend checking out their account. It's really awesome. DVHS class of 2020. Here's an example of our freshman account. They do that Freshman Feature Friday thing. They tell freshman stories. And this is our athletics account, which obviously right now is looking a little bit different. And I think the key thing is, it's, as I said in the beginning, it's easy to kind of get carried away and think like, oh, we not only do we need to Instagram, we need to like do all these different things. And going back to what Travis said in the very beginning with the various forms of social media, I think right now more than ever, consolidating and focusing on really like prioritizing the things you want to focus on. And I think as the year goes on next year, especially if you're creating an account and you're back on campus, maybe creating a sports account, maybe talking to your officers about creating accounts for their classes might be a good approach. But for now, I would focus on telling stories on your primary account. We do have a leadership account, and that's for us kind of just within our own class. It's a private account, and that's to kind of tell leadership stories because, like I said, I don't really let them tell those stories much on the main account. Things you can do when you return. Do you want to just fly through these real quick, Trav?
Yeah, I think they're
them.
here. They'll be on our website. We've talked
Perfect.
about some of them, so I think we can go to the next slide here. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so this is kind of why I'm sure a lot of you came to this webinar. I don't know the proper verb to use for this. Attended, showed up, hi. But it's the shelter in place. Now that we've kind of established those fundamentals for what we feel are important factors for social media and Instagram in particular, what does it look like now during shelter in place? One of the first things I did when we transitioned into, we went, I think it was the week after we got back from CADA convention. Like most of you, our county went on shelter in place, and that was just a crazy thing. And all these events we had planned, and it just there was a lot of upheaval and turmoil. And so we kind of focused on two things, and I focused on two things with my students. Number one was these short-term goals and our long-term goals. Our short-term goals, which we're going to focus on in a second, are things we kind of started right away and our ongoing initiatives. We have a number of things that we started pretty much from day one because our kids were hurting and they were confused, and they still are, but it was really, they had a lot of questions. So the first thing we wanted to do, which I'll get into in a second, was remind them that we're still there for them. So short-term goals we're going to give you, and our short-term initiatives are things you can start really when you close this presentation after you've set up your Instagram account and connected with your students. And then second, our long-term goals. These are more down the road before the school year ends. I'll touch on this at the end of the presentation, but we got our email officially today saying we're not back on campus this year. I've been preparing for that, and I've been preparing my students for that. And so our long-term goals really aren't affected by that. It's unfortunate and it's tragic in many ways. However, it doesn't change our long-term goals. And it's really transitioned into something where our leadership students are going to be executing and delivering these long-term goals. So we'll explain in a moment.
Yeah. And I do just want to say that it is, people are just grieving a lot right now. The communication that came out in the district that Dan is in, which is the district my kids attend, essentially was like, hey, we're not coming back, and everything that was planned is canceled. And so I do think like circling back from a high school perspective or a junior high perspective with your students and talking about like, hey, just because these events are canceled doesn't mean we can't like still come together, like shelter in place together, and utilizing social media as a platform to kind of help promote that. We wanted to talk a little bit about the balance and boundaries, and just say like during this time, there's a lot of grace, and you don't need to be your school's savior. It can feel overwhelming and daunting to feel like you have to take this all on, and even going back to stuff we were talking about before, like take it in strides, small steps, work with your students and build up to what you want it to be. But really partner with your students, and I would reach out to staff as well. And I'll say like utilize the community resources. My parent club organization, if you jump back, Dan, my parent club organization has actually been really incredible to partner with, and we've been able to partner with our chamber of commerce as well. So businesses are promoting like these community ideals for the high school too. It's okay to say no. Establish that routine in those office hours for what this is going to look like. Don't get sucked into the social media web where you're just like tangled and stuck. But do create some boundaries around when you're using it and what it's going to look like. And then while we encourage you to learn new technology, don't feel like you have to learn it all. The next, Dan's going to you can just click through them really fast. We were just going to share this is the current reality for a lot of people. This is our leadership teacher trying to have a conversation with me as her kid was like crawling across her kitchen table. The next
Shout
one's
out,
an actual
Catherine.
student, yeah, K-Dub. The next one's actually a student tech help support video where this cat like crawled across my librarian's face. But like, it's still in there. That's okay. That's the reality of what we're living in. The next one just shows like the dog that jumps on the teacher's lap during email. And then the last one is, this is like where a teacher of mine could go and actually get some like peace and quiet to get on a Zoom call, which is in his daughter's like playhouse outside. So like when
I'm
you
hiding in my
consider all
bedroom.
when you consider all the factors that people are dealing with right now, it's okay to create those boundaries and create health for yourself as well. As far as some of the short-term goals go, I know, Dan, you're going to talk about a few of these. We'll fly really quickly through these and some long-term goals just to give some ideas, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers.
So one of the things we did right away is I told you earlier, I don't do a lot of the posts, and I really don't, but I took over kind of this part because I wanted to act as kind of a liaison between the teachers and students. So I reached out to my staff and said, hey, send me some videos through Google Drive. And I put together there's I think 7 or 8 different videos I posted over the course of 3 weeks. And it was just teachers saying, hey, we love you and we're here for you. And you can check those out on our Instagram. But I think it's super important to remind your community in the short term that, hey, the staff, we're still here. That school isn't canceled. It looks different now, but the staff are still here. With your spring athletes, posting coaches, video of your coaches. We're working on one of those right now. Another thing we did, our school rival is Dublin High. Leadership teachers Kelly and Rob are good friends of mine. And we posted a picture of Dublin High and said, hey, send some love to Dublin in the comments below, because although we're rivals during the school year, we're all in this together. And I was actually surprised we only had to delete one comment. And there were dozens of comments, just people tagging friends at other schools and just sending that idea that community isn't just our campus anymore. It's this weird new reality. And there's a lot of good that can actually come from it. We did a shelter at home outfit of the day, Spirit Week, which there's examples of that on our Instagram. We did one where it was like, we have one coming up where it's like pet day, and post a picture of your pet and things like that. And we used the hashtag, which was DVHS at home. One little quick hack in general is when you're picking a hashtag, click the hashtag first, like search it on Instagram before you use it. Sometimes that Instagram hashtag, which you might think is clever, which is like love the Dons, might be a picture of a bunch of dudes named Don, or like Don Draper from Mad Men, and it's just not the hashtag you want to use. So pick something that's new, unique, and original. You can keep going. Connect with your seniors or 8th graders, create meaning in the chaos, and a lot of our planning moving forward is senior specific. And the creating a plan with your students for what comes next is huge. I don't want this to be my vision for what I think they need. I want it to be their vision and communicating with them. My seniors sent this email, and like I mentioned, our seniors have essentially taken over our primary Instagram account, and you can see that in action if you go on our account. You're welcome to steal all of this. This is an email I sent to my staff and to our student body, and there's all these Google Forms where kids signed up. With Google Forms now, you can actually upload video files and photo files within it. So it's an easy way for students to submit content. And it's been really cool. You can check out some of the takeovers that my students have done. So create a plan, get it approved by your admin, and then put that plan into action. This is just kind of an at a glance the past 3 weeks, I think 2 weeks on our Instagram account. These are the senior takeovers that they were talking about. These are examples of the seniors sending their love, or staff members sending their love. This is a little slideshow of our Spirit Week, and these are just the takeovers. So recommend going through those. Again, steal all these ideas. And then short-term continued, using social media to promote connection. This was Trav.
Yeah, so really just wanting to, when you look at like moving beyond just like the posting on Instagram and why you're doing that, there's really this idea that it's being used to promote the connection, especially during this time with the shelter in place and the stay home. Our big campaign has been this idea of community can't be canceled. And so you'll see a few examples of that. But we've also done things like students are providing digital babysitting for our staff members so that they can have an hour to actually like answer emails. But we're using Instagram to promote to students to sign up to do like these digital babysitting things. Workouts of the day, where we're just providing like health and resources for our staff members and our students. And then community partnerships too, where we have some local restaurants that have for the last 5 years have been putting on class fundraiser events, and we've turned around and said, like, you've been supporting us for so long now, it's our opportunity to help support you. So promoting local businesses, working with them to say, like, hey, the freshmen are doing a takeout dinner on this Tuesday, sophomores on this Wednesday, to limit the number of people on the streets, limit the number of interactions, but still help promote these restaurants that I know are having a hard time financially trying to make it. And then utilizing the tools that your district allows to promote that, whether that's Google Hangout or Zoom, and then communication platforms to share. So I know in all of my weekly principal messages to my community, I'm highlighting what AHS_Dons is doing and encouraging people to follow along as well. Just a few quick examples of that. Dan, if you click on the next slide, you can see, like, that's the digital babysitting, our Community Can't Be Canceled campaign, and then the videos that have been really popular for staff and student connection. So Dan, if you want to jump through and fly through the long-term connections.
For our long-term goals, we've tried to, rather than cancel events, we've tried to repurpose them as much as possible. We created a lip dub, and a lot of schools do these lip dubs. Last year, ours was really successful. It has, I think, like 350,000 views. And it's something we work on actually throughout the year. So my kids started filming in August for this event. So rather than cancel this event, we've pivoted, and we're trying to create like an at-home version for the second half of this video. So we're working on that. And our goal is to debut that at an end of the year rally, which we'll talk about in a bit. But our other goal is connecting with elementary schools in our sister school, and asking how we can support their staff. We're trying to create a portfolio of digital resources on Google Drive for teachers at those schools. If it's our kids reading a book, so they can just send a pool of resources out to their students in class, creating video art classes, teaching a song, basically creating some curriculum and just some easy lessons that can be sent out. My wife's a kindergarten teacher, and I know these types of things are super valuable to elementary school teachers right now. And then recognizing your community as essential workers. All of us in our communities have people right now who are going above and beyond and don't have the luxury of staying home. So let's name those people. Let's recognize them on our social media. Those are the stories that we should be celebrating and telling right now on social media.
Including the people on your campus, like the custodians or the cafeteria workers that are still providing free meals to our communities.
Absolutely. And then holding an online senior showcase. To be honest with you, I'm not sure what our graduation is going to look like, or if we're even going to be able to have an in-person event before June. And that has caused us to pivot to an event that will probably be live. We're looking at YouTube Live and utilizing Zoom and some other technology. There's something called eCam, which allows you to put together like multiple cameras and present in a unique way remotely, but allowing our poets, our songwriters to perform like a lot of musicians we're seeing doing with these at-home performances. And we're going to hold auditions for those in like a Google Hangout, and then promoting it on Instagram. And then an end of the year rally, something we're really excited about, holding an online rally. Although it's a challenge and there's a lot of things that are difficult about not being on campus, one of the unique things about being able to put an online event together is you can send the link out to pretty much anyone. So promoting this to our community as a whole, rather than like a parent or a grandparent can't come to one of our rallies on campus, but they can absolutely get a link and check out our online rally. So there's some details there, but we're really excited about it. It's gonna be a combination of video submissions, live performances, and we're gonna debut our lip dub at this rally, and that'll be in late May.
Yeah, and we'll kind of end there just by saying that every school is different, every situation is different, and certainly you guys are all feeling it. I know I am, where every day is different. So I went into work today, and the news was out that we're officially closed through the rest of the year. That hadn't been made official prior to that. Even when Governor Newsom was giving his address and his press conference update, he alluded to how clear he was, but he really wasn't clear. And so there are schools that still haven't made that official statement that they're canceled, and depending on your school and your student population and your access and the ability that you have, we know it's different for everyone. We would just say, our theme for the year this year was Dons Show Up, and our mascot is the Don, and it's actually been ironic that the year of the theme Dons Show Up that we're actually being told to like stay home. And so we really had to like pivot that into like, what does it mean to show up for each other during this time? And so even posting like what you see on the screen here, other resources about like what does that grieving process look like, and letting students and staff members and community members know that the school is still here, we're still operating, like we're still moving forward with learning and supporting our students and our student population, and that we're not going anywhere. And I know Dan was just sharing, he got a text message today from his ASB officer.
We use Remind. I don't have, my students don't have my number. Keep going.
Right, but yeah, but just that idea of like, hey, this is like, now is the time to reach out and send that word of encouragement. So we know it's going to look different for everyone. We hope tonight that some of the resources and the information that we shared was useful, beneficial, from like very beginning stages of social media hacks all the way to like, hey, what are some things that you can do now? But we'll turn it over to.
Piggyback? I'm going to piggyback
yeah.
on that real quick. The reason I think that message is important is if I were you and I heard a webinar like this, I'd be like, oh, and maybe you haven't even established an Instagram, maybe that feeling of I'm so far behind. And I know for me, I can get really lost in the weeds of trying to put on these big events. And my ASB officers reached out to me through Remind and said, hey, like, can you just send a message right now just with some encouragement, because we're really bummed. And for me, it was a reset mentally of like, sometimes most of the time right now, it's not about these big events that I'm trying to put on, that it's these interactions and reminding your community that you're there will probably go a lot farther than some online rally. And I think for me, that's an important reset, and hopefully an encouragement to you that it might be just some simple things that you're doing, utilizing technology and social media right now to encourage your community and to tell their stories. And it doesn't need to be these really large events.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna stop.
So we'll
sharing
turn over. I think
presentation.
Ron's kind of been monitoring the Q&A, but we'll make ourselves available for whatever's out there.
Guys, first of all, thank you so much. So many great ideas, and just like you have everybody buzzing right now. So so thank you so much. We're going to jump right into the questions. Jennifer asked, our student life Instagram is told from the eyes of our mascot. Should their account be a creator because he's kind of an influencer, or do you lose data that way? Does that make a difference?
I don't think it probably makes a difference. It would, the only
I do love that
though,
by the way. I love that.
Yeah. I think from just an ethos standpoint, I think it would be when someone's looking at a parent or a community member. I know, like, going to our analytics, a lot of parents view our account and seeing an announcement on an account from the mascot or like from like an influencer or a creator or whatever, rather than the high school itself. I think that gives you a little bit more credence in terms of your account. So I don't think it doesn't matter for the analytics, but maybe just in terms of the ethos of your account, having it as a high school would be probably a better bet.
Cool.
Yeah, and I would consider, like, what is that for your school? Like, is that your primary school's Instagram account? And that might help you kind of frame, like, well, what do we want to name it or call it for what it is?
Cool. All right. Thank you. Next question comes from Tori Ann. Tori Ann asked several good questions. Here's her first one. Do I have to create a Facebook page with this account? One of the steps had me create a name for that. Should I do that?
You don't have to. We don't do much with our Facebook because, again, I've chosen to, like, kind of consolidate what we're going to focus on, and it's not a big priority to our admin. I created one just so it exists out there, so no one else, because we've had students, this actually happened before, and you'll probably have it happen if you haven't already, like, create fake. We had DVHS Wildcats _ where they're trying to, like, take our, like, yeah. So I would say create one just so it's out there, but don't feel like you have to do anything with it. I think just so someone else doesn't co-opt it and take it from you.
Cool. Next question. Do you monitor the posts to make sure that they're appropriate, the posts that your students are generating? Who does that, and how often are they monitored?
I think that's going to be different from every site and every, like, sort of like administrative requirement. I have a lot of trust in my leadership teacher to have created systems and processes for what those posts look like. And we know who has access to create the post, which really holds them accountable as well to what is being posted. The biggest component there for me, and Dan, you can certainly share as, like, a current leadership teacher, is that conversation has to happen before you just let students go. So we make sure that we've sat down with our students and they really understand, like, the parameters of what the posts need to entail. And we also have at our district, and I'm sure everyone does, like, do not photo. It's an the way we run it in our district is like it's an opt-out thing that parents have to select when they go through our registration process. So everyone's allowed to have their picture posted on our website or on our accounts unless they've opted out of that. So we have a list of about 100 students, and we share that list with our leadership students, and we make sure they know that they need to be identifying who those students are and not posting them. But there's a lot of front loading and building that foundation with the leadership students so that we can trust them to curate that content without us having to micromanage every single thing that's coming in. Is that kind of what you do, Dan, as well?
Yeah, and I would say like the students know it's a privilege as well. And I could easily, I mean, it would look different, and I could easily take control back and give it to me and an administrator. So I've found more often than not, students hold each other accountable, and seeing, again, their kids, and they do, sometimes their idea of what's appropriate is different than ours. However, I've had very few instances of kids abusing the rules because they understand the privilege of having access to those things.
Yeah.
And just a quick follow-up, Dan, as the leadership teacher, how big is that circle? How many students have you given that power to take over?
Yeah, so I think it's less. So I have 120 students in my leadership class between 2 periods. No one in freshman leadership has access to it, so 120. I think there's like 8 kids who have the password, and that's grown a little bit during shelter in place. My senior officers, like I said, have it as well.
Okay, so still a pretty small circle of trust there, it sounds like.
And a small circle of trust in something where if someone who's not in that quote circle of trust, they can still absolutely have something posted. Like my video team doesn't have the password, but they know, oh, when my video's done, I send it to the ASB officers and they post it.
Okay, that sounds great. Next question comes from Margie. Margie asks, how many people can you have on the Instagram account? And I think, Margie, I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's how many people do you trust to have? So yeah. I think we just answered that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and at a certain point, if you give the password out, if there's too many devices logging into it, it might send you an email saying, hey, suspicious activity or suspicious login. The code is like 68342, and that student might have to do that. But that we haven't run into that much. We've run into it a little bit with the takeovers, but for the most part, I haven't had that issue.
Okay. Torianne asks, would you allow middle school students to take over? I know you guys are both high school, but what's your take on middle school leadership students?
I would allow a family to take over. I think that could be a really cool thing, like working with the parents and having your admin, the parent community, and say, hey, here's an idea, and maybe have the middle star of it. Do you have any thoughts on that, Trav?
Yeah, I mean, our middle school that feeds into our high school, the students aren't allowed to have their cell phones on campus. They have to be often in their bags. So there wouldn't be like a mechanism for them to go live or to take over at that point. So I really think that would need to be a conversation with the administration from that middle school. What do they think is okay and appropriate, and really allowing that privilege for that student? I don't necessarily agree with Dan that it would have to be a family, but I do think if you're doing a big middle school event and there is an Instagram account, I would imagine at a middle school level that's being.
I meant now. I thought it was for shelter in place. If I didn't have a face-to-face and couldn't have a meeting with them and have them understand the terms of like our takeover form contract, then I don't. Yeah, that's all. That's how I interpreted the question. During the school year, I probably would. A leadership kid at a rally or a LTA during lunch, I would probably allow that.
Yeah.
Cool. Jennifer asks, how is content on your story different from the content that you put in your posts?
Yeah,
good question.
So for us, our account is story stuff is going to be more announcement related, and this isn't like a rule necessarily, but more of like the idea. Like if you look at our feed right now, it's going to be more storytelling, and I'll try to use a different word than story because that'll get confusing. It's more narrative driven, and our story tends to be more promotional. It's like, hey, come to this, look at this. If a club sends me something, I generally put it on the story. The algorithm also gets a little weird with the story. You're actually more likely to see content from stories, even if you don't engage with the account much. It might prioritize that more. And also in this this boils down to kind of your philosophy. I think having an account that is aesthetically pleasing, the feed itself makes people more likely to want to see your content. And so for us, if it's just a Canva or something where there isn't a lot of intentionality that went into the creation of the post, we're more likely to put that on our story as well.
Cool. All right. Next question. What app is your school using to get the different writing and fonts on your photos? How do you make those look beautiful?
Yeah, that varies year to year. This year, we just have our senior class president. If you look at the senior class account, which we can mention in the chat, I think they're at DVHS class of 2020. I'll look it up. But anyway, our senior class president is just insanely talented artist, and she does it literally all that's by hand on her iPad. And so that's not super helpful because when she's gone, it'll look different. But I think that's the other thing too, is like what I found, if you scroll through our feed, it looks a little bit different every year, and that's okay too. You don't need to, I think like when you think of curators and these Instagram influencers, they try and have one aesthetic throughout theirs. I'm okay if ours doesn't, to be honest with you. Like every year, and as we know, is different. And so right now, to answer your question, it's a girl who just doodles it.
But I do think that that's a good point of like tapping the student resources. I'm sure they know because our students will use they have different apps like Font Candy, or I'm blanking on the other ones that they use. But we've also really worked with our digital design class. We have a really talented digital design teacher who supports the program as well, who's worked with our students to create different like logos and fonts as well to use for sharing on our social media accounts.
Google has an app called Snapseed. I'll type it in here. That allows, oh my gosh, I can't type. That allows you to, it has some general templates for that you can put on top of photos. It doesn't have the same squiggly stuff, but actually I used for all the DV teachers send their love videos on our account. Those thumbnails I made with Snapseed, and I just brought a picture in there, and I used the text. It took me 1 minute, and it's super user friendly. So Snapseed, I think it's free, might be a couple bucks, but it's a Google app, and it's great. So if you're looking just for something simple to add text on photos to kind of give like a consistent aesthetic, which is what I wanted to have for those DV teachers send their love videos, Snapseed was good for that.
Claudia is also recommending Canva. I'm a fan of Canva.
Yeah, Canva's great.
Yeah,
Canva is
sure.
going to be more, I could be wrong, but we've used Canva a lot. And to be honest, like we had a Canva addiction for a while. But I believe Canva is just going to be more postery, and rather than being able to put text on photos and stuff. I could be wrong. At least it used to be that way. But Canva is awesome. It's a really cool tool.
Jennifer is asking a question that a lot of other people have had as well. When someone takes over, when you do that takeover, do they get your password for the day, or do they share content via direct message to the students that have the password?
Yeah, shelter in place is looking different. But I'll speak to during the school year. During the school year, we would do it in like 6-week blocks. So we would generally do takeovers for athletes, and for our athletics account did takeovers, and our school account did takeovers for like a choir concert or theater performance or speech and debate. And we would gather those students together and do like an info meeting with all of them. They would sign the contract, and we would log them in. And then after, you actually have the ability to log out all users on Instagram. You can just log everyone out. We had kind of an honor system going. We never had to use the log out all users. But I think it's a best practice to change your password somewhat regularly. But yeah, and then as far as shelter in place is gone, we've done something similar, but just in a Google Hangout version, where we sent that email out, and then along with my senior officers, we had anyone who wanted to do a takeover as part of that. They joined a Google Hangout, and we went through the parameters of the expectations and shared that contract, which is in your, which we'll be able to send that out.
Cool. Real quick, so a couple of questions on if you can share your both of your Instagram accounts. If you could just type that into the chat, make sure Dan and Travis, and just make sure it's sending to all panelists and attendees. And then Claudia is also asking, may I share the YouTube link with my officers for them to watch. And so I'm assuming
Is that
Claudia,
this YouTube link?
Claudia, if you can just clarify that. I'm not sure if she's talking about
Our YouTube channel is, I'll kind of, this is another important thing I think too, is like if you're going to create multiple social media platforms, having similar or if not, if you can't get the same, like our YouTube is at DVHS Wildcats, and so is our Instagram, and that's what we use for both for our school. Travis and I forgot to click the slide, but we're going to post all this material on our website as well. It's matterleadership.com, MATTER leadership.com. Maybe Jeff or Ron, you could send that out as well. And also that's our Instagram. It's at Matter Leadership. So, and Trav, your Akalani's is AHS.
I put it in there, AHS
Okay,
_
cool.
Dons, and it's up there. I typed yours into you, Dan, sorry.
Okay, cool, perfect.
Beautiful, thank you. And then Claudia clarified, she was asking, yes, for this video recording, which is, this is a good, you had a really good segue there because you were talking about branding and trying to keep it as close as possible. So our brand is CADA Leaders, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And so this will be available if you go to YouTube, the CADA Leaders account on YouTube, you can subscribe now. And if you click the bell, because I love to say click the bell, then as soon as this is posted tomorrow morning, then you'll get a notification as soon as possible. So guys, you let me know. We still have a list of questions here.
I have time,
so
if you have time, Travis.
If you can hang with us for a few more minutes, awesome. Bridget asks, can you share how to do the Tuesday takeover thing?
Yeah, so I think it's, for us, it's been, I mean, the logistics of it, meeting with your students, and then for us, it's figuring out what's your purpose behind it. Like we've had, I think in our presentation, and like I said, I'll send it out, I'll post it on our site tomorrow, or after this. I think having a specific direction for it rather than, hey, just like hang out. Like one of the cool things I think our seniors are doing is like Friday is like a workout Friday. And so they've done a takeover. The seniors are teaching, like they're doing workouts. And then like Wednesday was like teach something Wednesday, and a girl like taught how to do like some baking. So I think for shelter in place, it looks a little bit different. For the school year, our takeovers were more event based, like, hey, theater is taking us backstage. For this, we're doing a combination of leadership teachers, or not leadership, that's what I am, of teachers taking over, kind of showing what their life is like, because as Travis showed pictures from his staff, like our it's crazy. And so just showing staff members' lives. And then also for students, it's just not necessarily giving them just like absolute freedom of just like, show us you waking up at 3 p.m. and then playing video games, like do something. So I think that would be my suggestion. Do you have anything for that, Trav?
No, I think that's good. I mean, again, like we really want to let the students drive that content and what's out there and what they want to see. So I'm holding, regular meetings with the leadership teacher, ASB officers, students, and they're helping to drive like a lot of that sort of stuff. I'm curious if that answered the question about the takeover, or if that was more about the takeover contract and giving students access to the account.
If it doesn't, then they'll hit us back up.
They'll answer. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of related kind of security related questions. Maria asks, can you screen through comments before they get posted?
I think you can. You can definitely turn comments off. And what we found is like, we've anytime it's, and the exception to this was when we posted our rival stuff the other day. I only had to delete one comment. You can delete comments for sure. But I've had to turn commenting off in the past for sure. And you can absolutely do that. You can actually have it default to when you post something, not having comments.
Okay. And
I'm actually going to look into it right now. I don't remember if you can have the moderating. I know you can on YouTube.
Torianne asks, what about the replies from followers? How often are those posts being monitored, and who is doing that?
For us, I don't go through every comment. If I have, how about this? Like 90% of our posts are going to be fairly innocuous, and there's not going to be a lot of like sarcastic banter back and forth. But, and this isn't like a foolproof system by any means, but what I've found to be successful is when I know we're about to post something, or I see my ASB officers have posted something. And going back to the for students, by students with adults, another reason I have that set up is like, I don't want to be on Instagram constantly. And so equipping the students, like, here are the things to look for in a monitor. So when I know we're going into rivalry week and we're going to be doing different rivalry things, one of the things I do personally is I communicate with the leadership teachers at the other school. We did this. Yeah. Anyway. And then letting my ASB officers know, hey, I need you guys to help me with this. I'm not going to be able to be on there constantly, but let's scan the comments. And if you're really worried about replies and whatnot, I would just turn commenting off. Kids, it is another subconscious thing, like, oh, okay, well, if they're going to keep turning comments off. And don't be afraid to block kids either. We've had to block students, block accounts. You have that ability in Instagram to block them, which will not allow them to see your posts and not allow them to comment on your posts. And I've had to do that as well.
Yeah, and I do think, just to add to that, like, I do think we do a lot of work with our leadership students, like Dan was saying, to establish, like, what does it look like to have the responsibility of managing this account. But there's also, like, we have a lot of trust and respect in our student body to be to also be respectful. And the very few times that we've had inappropriate comments that have come on there, well, one, we're able to delete them. Oftentimes, like, the students are coming forward, identifying, like, who that student was with, like, a screenshot, even if it then got deleted, so that we're able to follow up and have those conversations. And I think at least our student body, like, there's a lot of parents on there as well. So, like, parents are seeing that, the students know that parents are seeing it too. And our student body is aware that, like, this is an extension of our school, and the same school rules apply, and we hold them.
I've actually had to delete parent comments.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're
All right,
not
guys.
they're not about it.
You guys have been so generous with your time. We're already 75 minutes in. If you wouldn't mind, do me a favor. I maybe want to answer one or two more questions. If you click on the Q&A and you just kind of take a look at that list, I definitely want to make sure that some way, somehow we get answers to everybody's questions. But again, want to be respectful of your time. So if you take a look and there's maybe something you want to address quickly, or just something that you can kind of maybe knock down real quick, if you can take a look at those, what's one or two more that you might want to answer before we wrap this up?
Yeah, Lauren's question regarding technology for the online rally. I saw a few things. I think this is worth addressing because someone else mentioned earlier, like, their admin isn't letting them use Zoom or Instagram Live and stuff, and I totally understand that. Ecamm, the way I plan on using it, I think the software is like $20. And to be honest with you, I say all of this having not done it yet. So we're going to do a few trial runs, but basically the way I am going to do it is I'm going to act as kind of like the director of the rally, and picture YouTube Live as being the projector, like it's what the people are going to see. And then Ecamm Live is the software, sort of like Zoom, where I can share the desktop. The desktop then becomes YouTube. So for our Lift Up, it's going to be pre-recorded. It's going to be a file on my desktop. I'm going to press play on it. It'll go on YouTube. For our student performances, our goal is to have 2 live student performances that we can switch to in a Google Hangout and just let them rip. But these are going to be kids who are we're going to have a contract, and we're going to have an audition for them. And our rally MCs, I think we're gonna have 1 rally MC in their home. So basically the goal behind this is it won't be just a live thing unfiltered on YouTube. It'll be a heavily curated event that I'm gonna manage. And typically I would not do this much management. I just have a lot of time on my hands right now. But I think a more simple way to do something like this would be to try a pre-recorded rally, have people submit videos and do a YouTube premiere. Which is a really cool way of doing this, where YouTube Premiere, it allows you to set a time, like 7 o'clock on a Friday. You can send it out to your parent community and family community, and it becomes an event where people watch this thing together. And I think it could be, especially with your seniors, having seniors submit videos, staff members submit videos. So it's something that there's a lot of buy-in from a lot of people. I think that's a workaround for the live, rather than having to rely on this other software, is you create a video and tell the story of your school and put that on YouTube and have that as like a live showcase, even though it's not necessarily live technically.
All right, we're already at 8:18, guys. I think if we can go ahead, there are still several questions, but I want to kind of wrap this up. So guys, if it's okay, if we can just make sure we'll move these answers into our chat. Like, if you can, we'll talk offline.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I want to make sure
and honestly, I was just getting, that's my daughter. My daughter's, I think, going to bed. But honestly, as our emails are on there, we would love to hear from you guys. So if there's questions that we can answer individually, I know I bring a more unique perspective as the principal of a high school, and Dan
more
certainly
unique
can,
with me. I didn't know it was a competition.
and Dan can certainly share as like the leadership teacher living that. But we'd love to, we'd love to connect with you guys. We're also happy to schedule time to connect together if it's helpful to have that administrator and leadership teacher perspective as well. Anything we can do to help support. We know these are really unprecedented and trying times, and we're all, in it together. So whatever we can do to support, we're happy to help.
And right when we hop off this call, Ron, when we're done, I'll throw our presentation. I can send it to you as well. I'll also throw it as a blog post on our website, which we put, I think, in the chat somewhere, matterleadership.com. And we have a podcast coming up this week, actually, that will be pretty cool as well.
Outstanding. Well, guys, thank you again so much. Travis and Dan, appreciate your time. Thank you to everybody who was watching. And then before you all sign off, just want to let you know that we want to continue to do this kind of thing. Our next event is going to be Monday, April 20th at 7 p.m. We are specifically going to be addressing the class of 2020. How do we honor and recognize our seniors, our 8th graders? What are the strategies that you are going to be doing? This is actually going to be a little bit different than the previous, like this event and the last event, because this is actually going to be a full-blown like Zoom call. So we're going to be listening to everybody's ideas, get everybody, be able to see everybody's faces, and we'll spend some time kind of split apart between middle school and high school, and then kind of do some breakout groups and then come back together. So please make sure, check your email within the next couple of days. We're going to be pushing that out again, Monday, April 20th at 7 p.m., focusing specifically on how do we honor and recognize our class of 2020 in this very unprecedented time. So Dan and Travis, thank you once again. So appreciate your time, and thank you. We'll give everybody a kiss goodnight.
Yeah, I thought it was for us. I appreciate it.
All right, Jeff, thank you. Jeff was in the back channel as well. And guys, before we all sign off, what I'm going to do real quick, because I still don't know a way to like turn off the webinar portion, but like keep you. So yeah. I'm going to just email you out a brand new invite, and we can kind of all come back and just sort of touch base on how we can answer the rest of these questions and
cool.
and go from there. So so thank you again. We're going to officially end this.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, and a good night. And Dan and Travis, check your email because I'll be reconnecting with you momentarily.
Perfect.
All right. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night.